All right, good morning. Welcome to the grant writing workshop on pilot grants. This is put on by the Georgia CTSA, which is a collaboration between Emory Morehouse, Georgia Tech, and UGA. So I'm really pleased to welcome all of you today to learn about writing pilot grants and to learn about some of the pilot grants that are available to you at your institutions. My name is Kathy Grunling. I'm the Executive Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs at Emory School of Medicine, but I also co-lead the collaboration and multidisciplinary team science part of the CTSA, along with Lily Evie at Georgia Tech. Sorry, UGA. I'm going to just quickly move on and turn this over to our main speaker today, Camille Vine. She is a professor of medicine at Emory University and the division director of geriatrics and gerontology. She also directs the Center for Health and Aging at Emory, and she's held grants from the NIH, AHRQ, and the VA health system. Camille is our resident expert on pilot grants, and I'll turn it over to her. Thank you so much, Camille.
Thanks so much for having me, and good morning, everybody. I'm going to jump right in, so we'll have time for questions, and we have a fabulous panel coming up afterward. So again, I do have funding from a few different sources, and I really enjoyed putting these slides together because it kind of helped me go through how several projects came to be through different kind of funding mechanisms and early collaborations, leveraging pilot studies. So I hope that'll be helpful to you. I'm going to cover at the very beginning, I'm actually going to just start a little bit with some things to think about actually in the early proposal writing stage for pilot grants, because I think this really helps in thinking about the scope of the project that you want to do, to really think about whether you need some more preliminary data, and to think through how what you want to do aligns with funding opportunities that are available. We'll talk about a few pitfalls that things that I've done and lessons learned along the way. And then we'll go into kind of some of the stories, so almost case examples of pilot studies and some of those lessons learned. Lastly, a few resources to be aware of. Some of these are, a couple of things are related to Emory, specifically based on where I'm located, but hopefully will help spur some questions at your own institutions and places to look. So as we, begin to think about the need for a pilot study, always we're going to be starting with what's the problem that we're trying to address? What's that big clinical picture kind of scientific gap that we encounter that we think we're ready to really help extend the knowledge and get us moving forward? So you want to, we're going to be thinking about an idea that's both important to you. You've got to have that passion, that spark that's going to help you make it through the gauntlet of peer review and all the other things that get in our way. But also it needs to be something that others that are going to potentially be collaborators or partners with you also consider to be really important. So starting to kind of, as you mull over those ideas, you're presenting things to your peers, your mentors, that's kind of that key idea that you want to try to address. Obviously, we're making sure we're looking at the literature to identify, make sure that others have not already addressed this, but also to potentially, leverage other study designs that may be there to, give us some ideas, spur some ideas, maybe look at a different population with a similar methodology. That will be one of the things that we're going to talk about, is feasibility, which is one of the main goals of a pilot study, is to help prepare for that larger definitive trial. And then, as we'll talk about throughout, this is a great time to start developing those relationships with colleagues, your co-investigators, your scientific team, because these pilot studies often lead to years, right, of research together. And these are relationships that we cultivate and, really, make our scientific life, our professional journeys rewarding as well. And so these are really great ways to start building that team of people that you hope to get to continue to work with for a long period of time. So as you're identifying a funding mechanism, hopefully for a pilot grant, make sure and read the grant announcement really carefully. And lesson learned from one of my projects that we'll talk about later. I was a bit naive to the mechanism. It was an AHRQ funding opportunity. and we realized a few weeks before the deadline that our budget limit was inclusive of indirects, which basically about halved the money that we thought we were going to have available. And this was a multi-site project, including a couple of colleagues that, of course, fortunately had really good relationships with, and we were able to navigate a strategy to keep the project going, keep our, to actually be able to accomplish most of what we had originally drafted and get money to the institutions throughout the project. But it was a bit of a late discovery. And as you're talking about relationships that you're building with your peers, it wasn't a really comfortable conversation. So making sure you read that announcement carefully, particularly as it relates to any kind of criteria for who can apply, the funding that's available, what kind of work can be funded, and make sure that what you want to do aligns with what that funder wants to fund. Start thinking about where are the areas where you may need someone to help kind of complement the skills and methodologic expertise that you bring. And this has been a really fun part of kind of the work that I've been engaged in over the last 10 to 15 years, is starting to, of course, probably started out first early with biostatistical support, a biostatistician that I've now been working with for about 15 years, who was willing to kind of partner with me when I was a career development award applicant and didn't necessarily have a lot of resources yet, but was part of a center, right? And he was willing to start working with me under that kind of funding mechanism and center support. Others along the way, I've gotten into work in the implementation science kind of field. And so as a clinician with quality improvement experience and expertise, this was an opportunity to start learning about not just, can this work, but why does it work if we think we're seeing something that's starting to make change in a clinical environment, or if it's not working, why not? So an implementation science methodologist partnership became really important, and also, again, just a lot of fun and a lot of learning along the way. And then, if you've identified a specific mechanism, it's so helpful to get an actual example funded grant. On if it's a federal source on NIH Reporter, you can often look up that mechanism and see who else is funded. You're likely to find someone at your institution who's had it before, or certainly part of the CTSA network. And people are often very willing to share kind of an example grant that, is confidential for you to use, but is just worth its weight in gold and helping you kind of see some of the strategies that this funder at least has appreciated in the past, as far as structure and ways to kind of craft the proposal. I really, I work well with timelines. So of course you're going to have your due date for the actual, the deadline for the proposal, but you really want to start thinking about, really working backward to honestly give yourself probably at least the month before the proposal is due to really just be refining, right? So in order to get there, you often need to be looking at kind of getting those aims developed probably 6 months in advance, if, at all possible, particularly if you're new to grant writing and haven't had a lot of experience yet, or it's a newer mechanism maybe that you haven't applied for that type of funding line before. Some you may need even longer, depending on, if you're looking at like PCORI, for instance, where you really need to have engagement with a community advisory board, and even in the development of the proposal, that really is going to take time to have a meaningful partnership. So really backing out how much time you need to really give yourself enough time for the multiple iterations that you're going to need, particularly for that aims page, that first page where you're laying out where the gap is and what you're going to propose to address it. Just you can't say it enough to kind of start early. Another reason to start early is that, as I mentioned, the budget can really impact what you're able to do. And that seems like a no-brainer, but like in that project I talked about before, where we had kind of misinterpreted the budget guidance, that was really late to be making any changes. So sometimes what you think you can do when you start really crunching the numbers, it's going to be challenging, or you may need to kind of rework the duration of the study, or how many touch points you're going to have with the participants, or how many different assessments you're going to do. And it's important to know, is that going to really, make it difficult to accomplish the aims of the project as it's designed? And then again, this idea of the specific aims page and its importance. And we'll spend just a few minutes on kind of crafting those specific aims statements. But that it's so, so important. Once that page is done and really, finely tuned, the whole rest of the proposal goes so much more easily. So if you can, have a lot of time to get good feedback from colleagues, mentors, co-investigators, before you, really take off with the rest of the proposal, it's just going to really make it a lot easier for you to have a strong proposal going in that first time. So some thoughts about kind of your specific aims statements. Again, you want to make this first page really convince the reviewers of why this particular gap is really critical for advancing the field. Give a little bit of literature on, why that's true, and also giving them an idea about why you're particularly well positioned to be the next, the person that's going to help fill that gap. You can preview the approach, the outcome measures you're going to use. If there's a hypothesis, sometimes for these feasibility and pilot studies, the hypothesis, it's not necessarily a hypothesis driven grant. So you're actually looking again more at feasibility. So be thoughtful about whether how you're going to craft what the goal of this particular project is going to be relative to your overall goals, both those short and long-term objectives. I like to see in that first page, if possible, that we can tell that the overall research approach is going to be feasible within the time frame of this award. If it's a 1 or 2 year award, I mean, really, after especially if it's a project that requires IRB approval or IACUC approval, you're going to need to build in that time. So you often, with a 1 year project, for instance, you're going to have about 6 months really to get things done. So kind of, thinking about where they really thought through that, even what I can glean from that aims page. And this is really where your reviewers are often going to spend a lot of their time, right, as they think about how they feel as they begin to move through the rest of the proposal. And then if it's a really kind of specific funding opportunity, there's sometimes an advantage in quoting even how, the proposal language itself, or the funding opportunity kind of announcement language itself, to really hit home why your proposal directly addresses what they want to fund. Because the funders, often have their own goals, obviously, about the type of things that they want to kind of be able to highlight in their own portfolio, and being able to kind of tie that back really quickly and early can be impactful. So again, that kind of, aligns with, as you move on from that aims page to your background and your significance, you're constantly asking yourself, so what? Why does this matter? Why is it important? Why is this the obvious next step in the field that I'm studying, to help get us to the larger, more definitive study? Keeping that in mind will help you kind of focus your writing. And then using some of the way that you even lay out the paragraphs, particularly for that background and significance, can help lead your reader to kind of easily understand why that research approach that you're going to propose is, the appropriately designed for that question. So, remember, your reviewers are often reading these late at night. They were on a flight where they were delayed, or they're coming in after their own busy kind of work week. And so, some things that you can do to make it easier for them to quickly scan and see those key points can be helpful. And so that's also some things about formatting, using some bold language. Bold font, particularly maybe at the key kind of point that's being addressed in each paragraph, even, so that if they are just reading those kind of bold statements, they're going to get an idea of how the different kind of background information aligns to lead to the study that you're proposing. You want to see some white space on that page. The more that you can integrate, some figures, or particularly if you're going to use a model that you're leveraging as kind of the backbone of the approach that you're using, that's a nice place to put that in as you're getting, kind of have that option. And I'll show you a couple of examples of things that we've done as well, to just kind of lead that reviewer to the approach that you're going to use. Okay, so one of the other lessons that I'll say, and particularly this relates to as you're thinking about you're writing the background and significance, or you're thinking about your problem, or is the preliminary data out there to really make it clear to the reviewers again that this is the next step study that needs to be done to get us to that definitive trial. And so thinking about secondary data analyses that might be reasonable, that are, help you even start to gather some publications with your scientific team. This can be another time, as you're starting to develop those ideas where you may want to think about, do we need to really hit home? I'll say in our area, we've been doing some work for older adults who are experiencing both urinary symptoms at night and sleep problems at night. And actually, we know clinically those often overlap, but the treatments that are currently available kind of stick to one domain or the other. And we needed to really hit home that these conditions overlap, they impact each other. And so we started thinking, what other data sets are out there that could help us ask that question? What are some of, the kind of health outcomes or health impacts for people, older adults who are experiencing both urinary symptoms and sleep problems? Well, those data might be out there to kind of start looking at that as kind of laying out why this is a problem, but it might help us to think about some studies that have already been done where they ask questions, right, about both these conditions, and could have some data sets that you might have data sets available for a secondary data analysis. So I'll just give you some ideas about, this is going to be specific to your field. Again, I'm in kind of the area of geriatrics and gerontology, but thinking about not just publicly available data sets through like NIH or CDC, which we've leveraged some of those, but also other studies that were done historically that may have data sets available for investigators who want to partner with them. So Study of Osteoporotic Fractures, for instance, is willing to partner with early career faculty or early stage ideas. You don't necessarily have to bring funding, you might need to bring resources, right? So they don't necessarily have all of the resources to do the analysis for you, but if you can leverage an internal mechanism, for instance, to run the analysis, they will make the data set available. And there's a process, right, for proposing a project, getting an investigator from that study on board on your project, and then bringing that to the study team. So there are a lot of different options. Just giving you some ideas here. Another one that's been really fruitful for some applications, and even to leverage for funding, is to consider ongoing or randomized control trials that are about to launch, where you might be able to add in just a few questions that could help move the field forward that you're interested in. So like VITAL was a study of vitamin D and fatty acids, the omega-3 fatty acids. They didn't have a major goal related to urinary symptoms, but some colleagues we asked, had asked if they would include a questionnaire, and then we were able to write with colleagues again an R01 proposal that leveraged the opportunity to analyze those data along with some other with data from Nurses Health Study. So being creative kind of in thinking about what's already out there that NIH or others have paid for that they might be interested in looking at in a new way. And this is just an example of kind of the website for Study of Osteoporotic Fractures. So a lot of times you can get some idea of the questionnaires they use and things that are available. And it, that can be a really novel way that helps. It's kind of a win-win for the study team that originally did the study and for you in building your collaboration. And then the last thing I'll just highlight on kind of thinking about the writing part, I really like having timelines in the proposal that show me what the team expects to be their milestones along the time frame of the funding opportunity. And so just sometimes again it breaks up the writing a little bit. It shows the reviewer that you've really thought through again feasibility of this project, which is a huge part about any kind of pilot study because they're often short-term awards, and makes it look like you're ready to go. So that's just another kind of tip for making these compelling. Some pitfalls. So again, first thing, being overly ambitious. So I'll give you some examples of things that I would consider a bit ambitious for some types of pilot studies, whether it's a quality improvement project or it's a something that's going to leverage chart review data, or it's a small clinical study. What sample size might look a bit ambitious, or what kind of proposed work could seem like you've kind of bitten off too much for what the project resources can bring you. Remember, for these pilot mechanisms, particularly if you're headed toward kind of a clinical trial mechanism, and some of that is, that's been the kind of the path that I've been on for several of these projects, is that a pilot study is not going to provide any kind of definitive data on efficacy, certainly. And even looking at response, on a health outcome measure needs to be crafted carefully with, again, your biostatistical colleague, because looking for kind of even an effect size could be kind of a red flag for reviewers. You really are looking at maybe what's the potential change on an outcome that we think is going to be the outcome of interest for this population or for this study design. How do we see that change within the groups, not necessarily between group comparison? Most of what you want to learn is, can we recruit the population? Are they willing to be randomized? Can we actually do the procedures that we think are important for this next, kind of gaining scientific knowledge in this field? So those really need to be front and center as kind of the overall outcomes of the project. Getting some idea that the assessments that you've selected or outcomes are aligned well with this clinical population or the area of interest. What's the validity of those? I'd say for a pilot study in general, it's probably best to anchor on a validated measure if possible. If you're going to gather some, obviously you may want to gather some other information, like maybe through focus groups or interviews. Those can be very rich sources of data in a pilot proposal, but that might be too exploratory, right? If that's the primary outcome for these, it depends, right? And then again, keeping in mind the timeline of the project to make sure what you're proposing will work. We're all at really fantastic research institutions. You have the CTSA backing you up. Everyone should be writing about how well positioned they are with the resources that are available through the CTSA and your institution, that you are uniquely positioned to be the person doing this work, right? All of these are going to be competitive, and you want to show how not just you as the applicant, but again, you brought together this team of people, you have these resources available, you're going to be successful, you're ready to hit the ground running. Again, the statistical plan for these can be a bit tricky. So it is a great opportunity to start developing a relationship with colleagues that are going to help be your that are going to be your biostatistical partners moving forward. And if you're in a center mechanism like CTSA or other centers in our institutions, leveraging someone who has some funded time potentially to help in these early stage projects. Again, making sure you're asking kind of for something that's within that scope. It can be a great opportunity to build a foundation for that long-term scientific relationship. And then if just a few sentences on how you're going to address potential barriers. Every project's going to encounter challenges. We certainly know that over the last few years of just unexpected things that happen. I mean, the pandemic was a major one, right? Obviously, you're not going to be able to plan for that kind of thing, but how are you going to handle it if, a co-investigator leaves, or you have a delay in onboarding study personnel, or you have a little bit longer maybe to, you find that one of your outcome measures is not, kind of performing well in the population as far as being feasible for them. Or is there any, kind of what if recruitment's a little more difficult? Kind of giving some idea that you've thought through what some of those challenges might be can be helpful. Okay, now we're going to move into kind of the examples of somewhat from my own experience here and some lessons learned. I did want to, in some of this, I'll say when I first started with some of my very early work, probably about 15 years ago, I don't know that all of these frameworks were really well laid out at the time. So this is going to evolve, obviously, as your scientific career is evolving. And so staying abreast of kind of how things are changing, again, from peers who are going through reviews, maybe in a year later or so than you did, getting a sense of kind of how the world is kind of changing around you. I mean, for instance, one of these projects, the kind of clinical trials mechanisms that NIH proposed kind of came out right when we were planning a resubmission. And it actually got into a little bit of a sticky situation because our project at one point had not been deemed a clinical trial. And then as we went forward with the mechanism, it changed over to a clinical trial or vice versa. I don't know. I couldn't remember which way it went, but we actually had to kind of advocate for our project to move forward, even as a resubmission to the same funding mechanism. So it can get a little tricky. So using what models are available, again, keeping in mind what the funder wants to fund, where they see their kind of portfolio in the kind of scientific kind of community is really important. So This is an example of the clinical trial pipeline from the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. I do some things that are related to behavior-based mechanisms of, interventions. And so understanding what the reviewer kind of mindset is and what the funders kind of thought is on where our project falls in this kind of timeline was really important. And it also, again, kind of gives you a backbone for kind of some of the way that you're going to talk about your research approach in particular. So keeping in mind a model that's appropriate for your project and kind of aligns with things that the funders funded before. This is another one, NIH stage model for intervention development, particularly for kind of projects that may be headed along that clinical trial pipeline, which if we're going to be doing things that are applicable to kind of the, human health and kind of the clinical world, as far as kind of hopefully impacting the health of the US population, you want to be familiar with where kind of your project lies in this and whether that's appropriate, right, for the funding mechanism. So you want to be cautious in a pilot trial or a pilot study of any claim of efficacy, right? That would be very unusual to be able to demonstrate that in a pilot study. However, you can see some of these arrows kind of go back and forth and it's all over the place, right? So sometimes we are, I will say in the QI kind of research realm, sometimes we do we do a QI project and then we say, that seemed to kind of work, but I don't really know why. And I got some feedback as we were going about some components that maybe were a little bit clunky or harder for the sites to implement. Maybe I should go back and do a hybrid kind of kind of study where we were learning some of that kind of feasibility data, which is more of the stage one, but then in a later part of the project, moving into kind of an efficacy kind of study of maybe 2 ways that we can implement this work to see if one's better than the other. So it can kind of go back and forth. And sometimes you think you're ready to head toward implementation and you hit a roadblock with, as the study expands to new sites, and you learn, I actually need to go back and do some additional refinement of this. And here's another funding mechanism that will allow me to do that. But keeping these in mind, again, of kind of what the models are that your work kind of aligns with can be helpful. Okay, so I mentioned, the outcomes of a pilot study likely are not efficacy. And so you want to think about what are the ones that you need for your field. Feasibility is a major one. And that is about kind of what resources are needed for recruitment, for, seeing if the population of interest will tolerate the procedures that you're going to do. Will they adhere to the intervention? Can you retain them in the entire study duration that you have planned? Maybe tweaking the way that you're delivering the intervention. I'll give you some examples on that. You're really going to be looking at estimates of variation in the outcome measure in this population. So that's more of within group evaluation versus cross group evaluations. Be very cautious about any kind of claim of, knowing exactly what your effect size is to inform a sample size down the road. Obviously, your reviewers are going to want to see that you have some idea, but pilot studies can kind of underestimate or overestimate the sample size just based on kind of the small scale of these projects. So that's where having a biostatistical expert is really important. And you'll see that last bit there where this is your opportunity to really start growing those partnerships. And if you're looking at a partnership and more, our funders want to know that we've got patient voices involved as well. This is kind of a nice, can be an opportunity to start building those patient partners as well for informing the study. I will say I've seen kind of, as I've also been working in this area, this feasibility study versus what's a feasibility study, what's a pilot study. I think there's really a lot of overlap here. It's not so clear that there's a distinction. I think I generally kind of used to think of a feasibility study as really maybe a single arm project, or you're really just focused on the kind of process measures. In a pilot study, you might start looking more at, can I actually do the randomized trial that I'm planning? I think that's, the pilot study more is an umbrella term that could include kind of that single arm, more just really focused on feasibility. But, I think the lines are a little more blurred now. I'd say also that the clinical trial definition also has seemed to evolve over time. So keep that in mind, what NIH determines as a clinical trial versus FDA versus what goes on clinicaltrials.gov. It can get a little bit confusing. So again, think about what use the funders' definitions. NIH has case studies you can read through to see how they define a clinical trial. I think some of the work that we've done that maybe wasn't determined to be a clinical trial 10 years ago now might be determined to be a clinical trial. So it evolves over time. And you need to kind of, again, be talking with your program officer, talking with your team, and looking at resources that are available online. Okay, so again, a lot of the methods that you're going to use here are mostly going to be descriptive. It's an opportunity to refine the protocol. Your data, your analysis methods here, you're often have very small, relatively small sample sizes. So it's going to be often non-parametric tests, which is why it may not extrapolate as well to the larger, more definitive trial down the road. But again, important information, and then qualitative data can be really helpful here. And I'll talk to you about a couple of times where we learned some things through interviews we would not have known otherwise from just looking at our quantitative data. Okay, so this is an example of one of our, this was an R34 that, again, this one got stuck in that kind of clinical trial definition. It was initially determined not to be a clinical trial. But you'll see we were testing out our methods for a randomized control trial. It was not an efficacy tested randomized control trial. We're just saying, can we do it? Can we feasibly enroll the population and carry out the procedures in this clinical population for a future multi-site trial, which is now funded and we are right in the middle of. So the aim here was to determine the feasibility of a multi-site randomized control trial testing an integrated treatment of coexisting nocturia and insomnia. That's getting up at night to go to the bathroom and then having trouble going back to sleep. We'll evaluate the fidelity of the intervention across 2 sites. So we're actually, in this mechanism had resources to allow us to do a 2-site study. We'll measure acceptability using a mixed methods approach. So involved both, again, quantitative measures as well as some interviews with participants to really learn what worked and what didn't. We'll assess recruitment strategies to enroll the target population of older men and women with coexisting chronic insomnia disorder and nocturia, as well as the feasibility of randomizing and retaining participants over the 5 weekly visits. So you'll see here too, this aim starts giving some hints of the approach just in one sentence, right? Who we're recruiting, the conditions that they have. We give an idea of what the outcomes are going to be for this pilot study, and that already we're telling them it's going to be 5 weekly visit intervention. So we kind of think about where we are in this. We're really in kind of the, stage 1 intervention generation refinement phase. And this was the model that we actually put in the grant. And this was based on the time, some work from, and actually it was reviewer feedback that helped us, understand that they wanted to see this. So that's also, that's where the review process is really helpful. Oops. And it was from a behavior, the Orbit model that had been developed in kind of obesity related behavior change studies. But that, kind of model design was, framework was reasonable for our project as well. So we were able to kind of leverage it and then kind of let the reviewers know this is where, we think our study falls. And not, as far as, we had already done some work looking with those secondary data analyses at the relationship between the nocturia and sleep kind of coexisting condition, that we had done some work as a team, kind of looking at how to integrate the 2 behavior-based treatment strategies that are recommended for these conditions, and that we were ready to move on to the preliminary testing phase, which was really optimization of that intervention. And you can see optimization here can span the entire length, because at each step along the way, you're going to be learning new things about how to take this to the next kind of either, clinical application as far as the setting. And sometimes, what are the core components of the intervention to keep it, to make sure it's still effective, even as it might go out to a broader population, or you don't always have kind of, when you get into effectiveness, you're really looking at real world application, right? Not necessarily all of the kind of tight things that we can do in kind of the clinical research setting. So we were able to kind of lay out where we thought we were at the point we were applying for this mechanism and where we were headed. So these were some of those outcomes that, and again, this was published, so you can publish these data. Again, you got to make sure you're, kind of framing it right, because this is not an efficacy study. But it gave us a lot of really rich information about the resources we were likely going to need to recruit this population. And we saw that, for this first project, we had a lot of telephone screening failures. So one of the things that we started thinking about for the next study is how can we reduce that number of telephone screen failures? Because that's person time, right? You've got people on the phone and you're paying them, and that's not great when only 20% of those move on. But we also learned that once we actually got folks in and they consented, 60, more than half ended up qualifying for the study and randomizing. So our team had gotten really good at kind of figuring out who is the right person to offer kind of the study to, once we got them to that informed consent time. But the telephone screening, maybe we were losing. And then we were really excited to see the retention. I mean, you'll see both groups, and this included, again, a kind of health education control group, which, differential dropout is another problem. And we actually retained fairly well across the whole project. And even in people who maybe weren't willing to be adherent, were willing to stay with us for 4 months to at least do outcome assessments. So this was really helpful, and it definitely bolstered our next funding application to say we were ready to go. How did we report the results from this as well? Because of course there's curiosity about how people did on the outcome measures of interest. And so again, these are within group changes. Certainly things seem to be going in the right direction. Our nocturia episodes decreased by almost 1 episode per night, which, might be a bit unbelievable, so that's where you don't want to overestimate from our pilot study. But it was encouraging, but it also gave us an idea of what the change was in that control group, so we could start to think about an appropriate kind of way of crafting the sample size. We also were kind of looking at a few of these outcome measures about what might be appropriate for the larger trial. And one thing we suspected and we were convinced of here was, that sample size, again, in particularly the integrated treatment group, was 14, right? One of the options we had was to use a diary for the outcomes versus a questionnaire. And it's a validated questionnaire. But you'll see our ability to collect data from a diary, we ended up, losing like 3 people because they just didn't do the diary, to a level that kept it measurable. And so the group ended up deciding to go forward with the questionnaire here, mainly, and there's some things you lose there, but because we thought that having complete data was probably more helpful than potentially that night-to-night information from the diary. So that was one of the things that this pilot study kind of helped us learn in refining kind of the outcome measures, in thinking about whether, what we thought would work as far as an intervention kind of timeline would be acceptable to this population. Again, the new older adult population living with both of these conditions. We ended up deciding and leveraged a method that had been used in one of the other studies to mail out a self-screening questionnaire, and thought that might be helpful in reducing the number of telephone screen fails. And I'll say in the subsequent study that has played out. And of course, the pandemic happened right during this. And so we were forced to switch to kind of video delivery of the intervention. And actually that ended up likely really helping with adherence as well. So we ended up being able to demonstrate to reviewers, because of the pandemic, which of course was a huge disruption, that we could successfully deliver the intervention. And it did not appear to be any difference as far as kind of what we could glean, at least from the small sample size, of whether someone received it in person in a clinic setting or in person in a video visit. And so that was also really important for going forward. Okay, so some other things that you can kind of learn from, we've kind of talked about this a little bit, is also thinking about kind of that variation in response. And hopefully you kind of saw some of that about how you might both report it, still publish the results, but also make sure you're not claiming efficacy at that stage. I don't know that I did that as well on another project that I'm going to run through, and it may have also contributed to why we had some trouble eventually getting it published. But it is published now, and it did lead on to bigger studies. But it's another kind of lesson in being resilient, rolling with things that don't go the way you planned, and maintaining kind of that passionate interest. If you think there's things here that are addressable that I can learn from the pilot study and do better the next time, that, you know, can keep things moving forward, even when things don't go as planned. All right, so this was another one where we actually started out with a smaller kind of sample size. And this is an example of one where you could, you know, you might 30 probably, even if, particularly for a 1-year study, could be kind of questionable because that's a lot of work potentially to get that population in, depending on how difficult they are to recruit. But this was a project where we were starting to look at a urinary symptom treatment in a population that was new for the intervention. So the intervention had been studied in multiple adult populations with urinary symptoms, but in this case, we were starting to look at whether this could work in a population with Parkinson's disease. So the first step there, I mean, going to a randomized trial design in that population, very, you know, kind of right out of the gate could be tough, right? Because they're living with a condition where they may not, you know, there's maybe some question about whether you can even teach this behavior-based strategy to a population living with a neurodegenerative disease. So in this field, it was so novel that we actually just went with the single arm project to trial or study to initially gain some additional information on feasibility. So here we talked about how, you know, we're not going to be able to say whether this works or not, right, at all, but we're just going to get some information about what's this population look like that'll participate in a trial or in a study for that future trial, getting some idea of whether different outcome measures may be feasible in the population, and starting to get some idea of what we might need for the future. Now I'll say, so this was a single arm project. Because it was so new at the time to think about a behavior-based intervention for urinary symptoms in the population living with Parkinson's disease, this actually got published in a relatively, you know, a high impact journal with only 17 people. I don't know if that would happen now. I mean, this was back at, you know, you can see 15 years ago. But it was partly because it was really novel, right? And there was some question about whether it was even possible. And so because we saw really dramatic improvements in urinary incontinence frequency, at least in the group that was selected for this project, it actually did get published in a high impact journal. But this was really a refinement kind of study. It was just looking at if we could do kind of the typical intervention that had been done in other populations in this new population. The next was a career development award study. And I think this is where I would say I was naive as a career development awardee in thinking that we could really accomplish a trial that might get us toward an efficacy measure. I don't think I would do that now if I was talking to myself today. But at the time, we wanted to look at, you know, doing the behavior intervention versus a control activity. Okay. It was an 8-week study. So relatively short term. In this, we both had some questionnaires, but we were also using a diary again in this population. And we're just going to tell you a little bit about what ended up happening. So you'll see here, we had to assess about 300 people or so to get to 110 consented people. That's not bad. I mean, 34% of those assessed ended up coming through, but we only were able to randomize about half of those. So you might, you know, and it was 16% of those who initially talked to. So it's a lot of work to get this population, and kind of, can we get a little better on, you know, those who consent making it to randomization? I mean, maybe, maybe not. This one, though, one of the things that was really tough for this trial is differential dropout. So our control activity ended up being this task that involved some equipment the person had to take home. It did not have a good alignment with really anything that they were doing in their daily life. And again, with this patient population living with a condition that's kind of chronic and progressive, even for an 8-week study, it's just a lot to ask them to come in for multiple visits to do a task that ended up not really impacting the clinical condition of interest. And we got that feedback from them, and, you know, tried to change course a little bit halfway through. But we couldn't do a whole lot in the context of a clinical trial, but a lot of lessons learned, right? So differential dropout was going to be an issue in this. Good news, though, was our behavior therapy group, everybody stayed with us the entire time. And, you know, we were able to get full outcome analysis in that group. And then the outcomes, this is not what you want to see in a clinical trial design. So we actually saw improvement in both groups. It was not statistically different, which, okay, again, maybe you go back and you say it's a pilot study. We don't necessarily need to see difference between the groups. We weren't really probably fully powered for that anyway, but you certainly don't want to see everybody get better necessarily. It's good for them. But one of the things that we learned from this is diary keeping in this population was really helpful. And our control group at first was keeping a diary all 8 weeks of the study. So that was an important lesson that self-monitoring in this population actually likely had a really important impact. And it helped me for the future and kind of the next study. So I was glad to see everybody get better, but it wasn't the greatest when you're thinking about an early stage study and how am I going to get my next grant, right? Some good, we explored kind of looking at kind of our between group differences. Now, again, nobody's blinded. They know kind of what treatment group they're in. There's some caveats here, and this is just part of what happens in a behavior study as well. But we didn't, we did maybe see some, better reports on reduced bothering and improved quality of life in our treatment group, but it just wasn't quite what, we were hoping for. Nevertheless, we actually still were able, based on the behavior treatment group doing so well and relatively, not quite as well as in our first, single arm trial, but also, with clinically meaningful improvement, to still convince reviewers that we should look at this behavior-based protocol compared to a gold standard treatment at the time, which was, basically drug treatment. So it's not, not everything is not lost when things don't necessarily go your way, but it also really helps, I don't want to do a diary, right, in an alternate treatment option. And we want to maybe do that just a few times to getting some of the rich data you get from a diary, but certainly not have them keep it for, 8 weeks like we had done in the pilot. And we also had less data loss, right, with the questionnaire-based assessment. It was more feasible. So we did kind of leverage that we had obtained that as a secondary measure in that pilot to leverage for the next study. So some of those things here that were really important for kind of the next trial. We were able to get a next study, and this was more of an effectiveness trial. This was at kind of the merit level. This was a 12-week study. We were comparing drug versus behavior in this trial and had multiple sites. And we had been fortunate through, again, a center mechanism in the VA to have 2 sites, even in that last study, which gave us some of that cross-site experience, and then pull in other clinical centers that are funded through the VA for this final trial. I don't think otherwise I would have been able to do this on this type of budget, but because of some of those resources, again, they're available in the health system that I'm a part of, we were able to. This one was, a non-inferiority design, which we thought was, probably the most reasonable for this comparison. We didn't really need to show behavioral treatment was better than drug treatment. We just needed to show it wasn't worse to be influential in the field. So that's important for kind of knowing what the clinical question is down the line. And then what happened during this one? This was a COVID project as well. So, working with a population living with a neurodegenerative condition, obviously very vulnerable during the pandemic, and very, working with the IRB, our clinical study partners, and what's in our patient participants about what they're willing to tolerate, what we thought was safe, and kind of getting the procedures adapted without losing all the scientific validity. I mean, we were doing a neuropsychological battery in this study that you could not just transition to video. It needed to be done, certain parts of it needed to be done in person, but we reduced the number of in-person visits or touch points. We tried to streamline those as much as possible, so there was as little time with us as possible, but still had to kind of balance that with maintaining the scientific validity. So the things you just never know are going to happen. So when we look here, one of the things that, again, the number that went from assessed to consented dropped a little bit from the earlier studies. So it's, again, those pilots are not always a perfect representation. They start giving an idea of the personnel time you're going to need. And again, this went to a multi-site project too. So you've got now some of those issues, personnel changes, things happen, different institutions do things differently that are compounded, right, when you start going out to multiple sites. But we were able to randomize more than half this time. So that was some improvement and kind of refinement. We didn't lose anyone again in the behavior treatment group, and we halved our loss in this time an active treatment, right? But we had, less of an issue of that differential dropout, which was really important. And part of that's because we allowed people to, stay in the study, really worked on, look, even if you don't want to continue the treatment you've been assigned to, it's actually really important for us to get outcome measures. And so we were able to kind of keep them in, at least so that we had data for that final outcome. These were published this past summer in JAMA Neurology, so that was exciting, finally, to get to that kind of high-tier journal that we want to get this work to start impacting clinical guidelines, because we want, we're hoping that's where the gap was, is that drug therapy is what was recommended, and we thought, based on our work over these years, that behavior treatment likely had a role, at least for some people, right? The types that were kind of making it into these trials. And we want that to also be in the clinical guidelines. So this is where, you want to get into these high impact journals to try to start moving the needle on clinical guidelines. Hopefully that'll happen. But this was a really nice way of seeing the outcomes between these groups. Almost perfect alignment there in the kind of outcomes between behavior and drug. Okay, the last few minutes here, I'll go into just some quality improvement, a kind of stream of project that started as a QI and then moved into funded work. Again, if you're working in the quality improvement research space, keeping in mind what framework you're using to kind of be that backbone for your project. I did not, I have learned a lot by working with collaborators on these projects. It's been super fun. That's when this is why we're all kind of in this scientific journey together. So think about ways that you can leverage people at your institutions to start these partnerships early. We used, again, working with folks like Michelle Kegler at Emory, and then George Jackson in the VA. I've learned a lot about using kind of the RE-AIM framework, consolidated framework for implementation research, which is very complex, and you absolutely need a partner in that. Just some ways to think about making sure that you're building in strategies to align with some of these accepted kind of methods for looking at facilitators and barriers, in particular for why different quality improvement projects may or may not work. And then a lot of this is published also by the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, AHRQ, others. If you're a part at Emory and want to check out this Network for Implementation Science, it's a nice group. I know they had a social even last month. And I just wanted to highlight an AIM kind of development for this project. So I was working with a colleague, Melissa Stevens. She actually started out with just some institutional funding for this that has now gone on to multiple funded projects through AHRQ and the VA. And we just got notice that we are going to have another project through the VA called a query mechanism, which really starts to, again, look at how we begin to adapt a program for kind of not just the early adopter sites, but getting into kind of those middle stage adopter sites when you've kind of shown this can work in up to 15 to 20 places already. So Melissa was working in the emergency department and said, we are not prescribing as well as we could for older adults, and I think I've got an idea about how I can make this better. But that's a big idea, right? You've got to get it narrowed down to something that's going to be more scalable and measurable. And she had like a 1-year project, right, to do this. So she took that idea, and then again, this ended up being kind of a 1-sentence statement that includes, the project goal became reduce the use of potentially inappropriate medications according to the Beers criteria. This is evidence-based kind of criteria that's used in geriatrics in particular, but is evidence-based for safe prescribing in older adults, to a goal of less than 5% of prescriptions written for older adults discharged from the emergency department each month. I mean, 1 sentence, you've got the metric that you're using, the target goal, how often you're going to be assessing it. I mean, it's kind of like that smart, a smart goal, right? Kind of in that 1 sentence. And it really hits home to the reviewers that you've kind of done you've done your homework. Again, your team's ready to go. This project ended up being called Equipped. We like our acronyms. It's so much easier with Copilot and some of these tools to come up with things. So I encourage you to come up with a project name. That's been a lot of fun for this group to have that acronym. It's Enhancing Quality of Prescribing Practices for Older Adults Discharged from the Emergency Department. And it includes 3 core components. And this was where, Melissa kind of idea, we need to do a little bit of education, Some clinical decision support tools at the time of prescribing could likely help. And individual provider feedback is an evidence-based strategy. It's already been shown to change behavior, and I'm going to leverage it in this new clinical context, right? And in the population. So this actually kind of started out in an implementation phase, but then we ended up going back and getting funding to go back to intervention generation, figure out why it worked, and actually look at an implementation trial that was more of an efficacy effectiveness type project. So that's where, and some of that ended up being driven by different funders too. So I'll say, like, you know, Health Services Research and Development from the VA, they want more of a clinical trial implementation study. So we looked at there, we could leverage kind of a data warehouse-based dashboard that had become available during the time we were doing this project to look at doing kind of a digital automated feedback to providers versus kind of the strategy we had started with, which was kind of a one-on-one discussion with a champion on site. And that was really what, you know, that was something that was novel. We could do in the VA more easily, and would be funded by HSR&D. For HRQ, they really want to see what works. And so we actually, because we started in the VA, they liked the idea we were taking something from one federal system, right, into another non-VA system, but adapting it. So we're not starting totally from scratch, but we're going to leverage partnerships that we already have across our affiliates and start to learn how to do this in a different setting. So they didn't necessarily need that randomized design, but it was okay. They really liked the idea that we were doing things more efficiently by leveraging these existing partnerships. And then I had a colleague at another institution who's actually early career, who convinced an insurance partner for her health system to do a shared savings plan funding of it there. And so that was through Blue Cross Blue Shield Rhode Island. So you just, you know, you never know kind of what funding sources might be available if you start exploring. So as we wrap up, I know we're kind of at the last few minutes here, just some things to think about as far as resources and considerations. If you're doing surveys and questionnaires, you know, you're going to need resources to do the data entry, right? How much time does that need? Are you using previously validated questionnaires? Really learned a lot from interviews and focus groups, particularly for like that Equipped project. Clinical data decision support order sets was part of what we implemented. A lot of sites got really excited about that, but when we actually started looking at quantitative data where we could measure it, they weren't used that much. And so we actually wondered, should we just drop this? Is it really that important? But when we talked to people at the sites, at the implementation sites, we found out they were consulting the order sets, then ordering things through their own workflow. So we would have really missed a major kind of part of the, you know, dropped potentially a core component if we had only gone on based on our quantitative data and not leverage some of these qualitative methods to learn some of the information. But again, had a colleague who was more skilled in those, you know, that type of methodology, who ended up partnering on the project with us. So it's a really an opportunity to build those partnerships. Data warehouses, I mean, our clinical data warehouses are just getting more and more robust every year. So lots of options available. I mean, again, if you have a VA partner, and we have over like 25 years now of data, longitudinal data, there's a lot of things to be aware of as you delve into any clinical data warehouse. I talked with an epidemiologist who said it's like the multiple layers of Rome when you get into kind of the archaeological dig of that. So again, you need a collaborator, but it's such a rich resource for some of that early data. And then in some departments, for instance, I'm in the Department of Medicine, we actually get a little bit of time. In CTSA, you have, again, resources for data analytics and biostatistics core. Leverage those early to help you. When you're thinking about outcomes, again, if you need an idea of where are validated measures, look at the PROMIS measures. NIH likes these. Some of the toolkits are available there. That may be a good resource for the long term. I've talked a bit about the importance of kind of engaging a statistical collaborator to really help sure that you don't make sure you're not overselling what you're going to be able to do, and that can help you with interpretation. On sample size, again, if I'm looking at something, for instance, going to propose a chart review, if it's more than 50 to 100 charts in a one-year project, I mean, I'm going to very much question the feasibility of doing that. Similarly, for an interventional study, you might only need 20 to 30 people. It depends on, again, kind of how novel the project is, how well known the methods are, but think about that carefully as far as the scope. For data management, again, REDCap's available for free at Emory, and it's a great way to do survey data and have that in a data management platform that's more usable. There may, that may be available at other institutions as well. So make sure you're checking out what resources are already available to you that you can leverage. There's some options for getting kind of preliminary to research data now that we're on Epic through Slicer Dicer, for instance. The VA has a data core at the Atlanta VA that can help with some of that preliminary data. You just have to have the time to get it because they're working you in. So you may not be bringing resources at that point. And then just in conclusion, again, pilot studies are a really fantastic way to set you up for success, to help reviewers see that you're ready to go for that definitive trial. Just make sure that you're gathering the information that you absolutely need to be, well positioned for that, knowing there's always going to be some caveats, particularly when thinking about how you might try to claim any evaluation of effect size. Leverage a stage model or a model in general for the methods that you're proposing. And it's a really great opportunity to start building those scientific partnerships that hopefully will lead to successful collaborations and a lot of fun in our professional life along the way. So I'll wrap up there and I'll stay on for questions as we get into that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Camille. We'll pause here a little bit in case you have questions. You can raise your hand and maybe we'll recognize you. You can ask your question of Camille. What do you think is the one piece of advice you would give someone who's never written a pilot grant before?
I mean, the most important is the scope. I mean, it's just, you've got to make sure that what you're proposing, it works within what resources you're going to have. And I think the thing that we probably lean toward is we want to be able to say something definitive from a pilot study. And it's generally not going to be possible, and the reviewers are going to know that. So really what you can be more definitive about is about some of these feasibility outcomes. So just kind of staying in that frame, and that really sets you up for success to make this a long-term long-term opportunity. I mean, the project we're in right now is an R01. I mean, our group started working together really intently about 7 years ago, almost 10 years ago now, actually. So it's a journey. It's been a lot of fun. We've had some ups and downs, but making sure that you're kind of thinking about what's the appropriate scope for each of these mechanisms.
Yeah, thanks. John, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Dr. Vaughn. Good to see you again. Thank you so much for your talk. When I'm been approaching grant writing and stuff, people have always told me it should be incremental, but also impactful. And so to me, those terms seem almost contradictory, where if it's incremental, it can't be too impactful. So when we're designing pilot studies or trying to write a pilot grant, how do we sort of combine those two ideas and how do we decide something is both incremental but also impactful?
Yeah, I think, I'd say at least from my experience, the impact has been laying out for reviewers very clearly how maybe this patient population has the clinical condition that we think we can begin to address with, hopefully down the road, an intervention trial, right? However, we're not at that stage yet, but the clinical gap for this population is so important that this early stage study is going to help get us where we need to be when we're ready to write that definitive trial. And I think, that's what's helped us, and that's where that's where going to different, I mean, honestly, my Nocturia Insomnia project that's going on right now, I mean, that's with a colleague out in Los Angeles, also in the VA, who's a geriatrician who does sleep research. And then I do more of the urinary symptom side, right? We networked, right, at professional meetings. We were both kind of coming along in our careers at a similar time frame, and our mentors knew each other too. And we kind of got together and we're like, we're in the Nocturia side and these sleep problems keep coming up. They're in the sleep side and they're like, we don't even talk about the bladder, but we know it's a problem because people tell us, but everybody's kind of ignoring it. So finding that niche area where you're doing something that's new and it's unique to what resources you bring to the table, both as an investigator and your collaboration, is what helps show the impact. It doesn't mean that we're not going to be published in that high tier journal with that first project at all, right? I mean, it's not supposed to change practice yet, but it's clear that we're on a trajectory to change you know, we think to change clinical practice if things go the way that we think they're going to go. No, we don't know. That's why we're doing science, right? So if it's, you know, it may not go as planned, but there's enough, you know, experience and knowledge of what the gap is for that patient population that you're able to convince that this will have that impact long term.
Excellent. Thank you.
I hope that helps.
Yeah.
Thanks, Camille. One more quick question, if anybody has one? All right, oops, one more question, Mason.
First of all, thank you for your great presentation. So when we are writing a proposal, definitely we need preliminary results. How we can present these results, but simultaneously convince the reviewers this is not the end of, because if we add all the results, they may ask, okay, what is the point of the proposal or the money?
Right.
So do you have any idea or any trick to show them, okay, this is not the end of the things that we submitted?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what your preliminary data, you know, kind of demonstrate and, you know, what stage you are in the project. I mean, if, you know, for you know, the Nocturnal Insomnia work, you know, we didn't show any cross-group comparisons, and it really wasn't appropriate with that sample size anyway. We were working with a biostatistician in that project that led to the R01 biostatistical partnership as well. And we were very cautious not to claim any level of efficacy at all, because that's not what the study was designed for. I'll say in my Parkinson's work, I probably was a bit more naive in that. And I probably just, and that one also was, you know, there was an awareness that the clinical guidelines did not acknowledge any type of behavior treatment for this population. And we had now multiple studies suggesting it worked, even though the studies, as you saw, didn't go exactly as planned. And so they, you know, that still allowed us to go forward with an effectiveness trial. So maybe that's where you need to go if, you know, is a comparison to gold standard. And if you've already shown that in a convincing way, then that's where implementation studies begin to be important. Can we take this out to, you know, deliver it in a way across sites that don't have the clinical research expert person doing the study, right? Can we take it out into broader clinical practice? And so then you've got preliminary data depending on, you know, you may need to really look at what study is appropriate along the clinical trials pipeline.
Thank you so much.
And one last oral question, and then Camille has graciously just agreed to stay on and answer questions in the chat. Swati?
Hi there, Camille. Again, great presentation. Thank you. So I'm writing just now a feasibility pilot study. And again, like, you know, a single arm pre-post study design at the moment. And I do have some, like, you know, some data or some literature from my PhD thesis, but that was like long back, like over a decade ago and things. And this study population is not studied that much. And like, you know, we have like, you know, some kind of cross-sectional studies, but we don't have really like intervention trials and things. So how do you say that really in a feasibility like pilot study that we don't have much preliminary data to bank on? And maybe that's the whole idea of doing a pilot study and a feasibility, because we don't have much preliminary data to bank on.
Right. I mean, I think that's where, you know, if you've got, even from secondary data analyses, if that's possible, and if it's a really rare condition or rare disease, that may not be possible, but that can be helpful in showing that there's still an existing gap. I mean, making sure you're really looking at the literature. And then I would say, like, for my very first like intervention trial, I mean, I didn't have any experience recruiting people, but I was part of a center that we were, you know, as part of the GREC, Geriatric Research Education Clinical Center. And my mentors had a strong, you know, history of recruitment. And so of populations living with urinary symptoms, I was part of an incontinence, you know, research group, basically. So as an early career person, I was able to say, I'm going to be mentored by someone who has recruited similar populations. I've got the mentorship also because of, you know, I'm going to be able to work with the Parkinson's population. I'm going to be partnering with a neurologist who's going to work with me. You know, you're kind of bringing all those, that's that team, right? That shows that even, you know, that's the purpose of part of the award, is to develop you as an investigator. And there's enough evidence from those that are working with you that you're going to be well supported, that often you can overcome that for a early stage study, right? It's the first step.
Okay.
That's what
Thank you. Thank
you. Okay.
All right, thank you again, Camille. We really appreciate it. We're going to move on now to a series of quick talks about the pilot opportunities that are available to you at various institutions. And we'll be starting with Michelle Wong, who's the Senior Director and Business Operations at Parker Pettit Institute for Bioengineering and Bioscience at Georgia Tech. Michelle?
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm going to spend the next few minutes walking through all of the different places you can find opportunities while at Georgia Tech, and specifically opportunities that we have at the unit that I'm at, which is the Institute for Bioengineering and Bioscience, which is also known as IBB for short. So for everyone at Georgia Tech, one of the great resources that we have is InfoReady. This is where Georgia Tech posts all of our internal and external opportunities. Of course, internal ones are like, for example, sea grants or limited competitions. And here's a screenshot of what the homepage looks like. The user navigation is really easy, and I encourage you to check this out routinely and see what pops up. And Lauren shared that we will be sharing these slides, so you'll have all the links directly to the websites and the seed competitions that I'm talking about this morning. Another great resource that we have on campus is the Foundations Relations team has a list of all of the foundations opportunities. This is, again, another website I encourage you to routinely check out. If you have any questions about what's posted, or if you're interested in a certain foundation but don't see an opportunity listed there, you can definitely reach out to Christine, and she's a wonderful resource and is really her and her team would love to work with you answering questions or as you apply for any grant opportunities. So now specifically looking at sea grant opportunities that IBB offers, one of the largest sea grant programs that we run is our interdisciplinary research sea grant program. So of course, we're trying to give funding opportunities for people to obtain preliminary data and then use that towards submission of an external grant application. And the requirement for this is we need 2 investigators from different colleges on campus. So as you see, there's some examples like College of Engineering, College of Science, or College of Science and Ivan Allen. So definitely a lot of fun opportunities there. The grant offers $40,000 for 1 year, and typically we award 2 grants a cycle. And the next time we'll have this posted this application cycle open and posted will be in May of next year, and again using InfoReady. And as you can see at the bottom of the slide, I listed 2 of our most recent sea grant award teams. Another opportunity that we have through IBB is our core facility equipment sea grant, and it's a rolling application, so you can apply anytime. And only 1 investigator is needed. And what we do is we give 10 hours on these pieces of equipment that you see listed here as part of the sea grant for you to get preliminary data. And then the goal is for you to use that data for a grant proposal within the next 6 months after you've received funding. So I encourage you to check this out and see if there's anything on here that you would like to use. It's a fun sea grant to have. All right, and then the last thing that IBB offers are our team sea grants. This is a new opportunity that we're offering. And again, it's on a rolling basis. So anytime you feel like you're ready, please do apply. So we're bringing IBB investigators together to plan and submit for large grant proposals. We have up to 4 awards, and they give out $5,000 each. You can see that the proposal should have some detailed information about the budget. And again, this is posted on InfoReady, and I encourage people at Georgia Tech to apply for this. It's brand new, and we're really excited to get any applications when you're ready for this. The last thing I want to share through IBB is we have our BioNext e-newsletter. There's a QR code there if you want to sign up, because we mentioned our funding opportunities on this newsletter, and of course any upcoming events like Fun Things through Georgia CTSA. So I know there's going to be a Q&A at the end, so if you have any questions, let me know, or you can definitely feel free to email me. And I really thank you for giving me this opportunity to tell you about all the fun things that are available at Georgia Tech.
Thank you, Michelle. That was short and sweet.
Yes.
All right, next we're going to hear from Bakila Davis, who's the Program and Research Manager for the Georgia CTSA Pilot Grants. She'll talk about pilots through the CTSA.
All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk about how the Georgia CTSA can help with pilot funding. And my name is Ikila Davila, and I'm the program manager for the Georgia CTSA Pilot Grants Program. Next slide, please. So quickly, I'll talk about what we're looking for in applications, the process, the key dates and milestones, tips for successful submissions, and how to stay informed about future opportunities. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the Georgia CTSA is to deliver scientific and systems change that resolve barriers in clinical and translational research. And our partners are Georgia, Tech, Emory, Morehouse, and UGA. Next slide, please. So our goals in the pilot grant program are to support early stage, high impact translational research, encourage cross-institutional collaboration. We want to foster innovation and feasibility testing and this might be our most important one, prepare investigators for future extramural funding. Next slide, please. So to be eligible for our grants, you have to be a full-time faculty member. And by full-time, we mean what your institution deems as full-time. Over the years, I've learned that there's different definitions per institution. So however your institution designates full-time is what we take for eligibility. So full-time faculty from one of the partner institutions can apply. There's one proposal per faculty member. Collaborations among our partners are strongly encouraged. Junior faculty are encouraged to apply, and faculty that have overlapping aims are not eligible because, again, it's pilot grant funding. It should be novel. So we don't want funding for something that you already have funding for. Next slide, please. And with our pilot grant program, we have two categories. The first one is pilot grant category 1, which is translational and clinical research. So this is preliminary, preparatory, or feasibility studies designed to assess the applicability of new technologies, protocol, data collection instruments, or subject recruitment strategies as stepping stones toward a full hypothesis testing investigation. And this is the category that we get the most applications for, is category 1. So this is more of a typical pilot study. Next slide. And then we have category 2. So these are grants that address a translational research question, which could provide innovative approaches and methodological insights that could be generalizable to other projects and diseases. So some examples of that are best approaches to address important CTR problems and/or the science of translational science, innovative approaches to overcoming choke points in the process like regulatory hurdles and patient recruitment. And lastly, there's several examples, but this is the last one I wanted to put here: novel methodologies for clinical research that can be generalized to other projects. Next slide, please. So what we support and what we don't support. We support new and original research projects. We don't support extensions or variations of existing projects. We also don't support bridge funding for previously funded work. Next slide, please. And here's our application timeline specifically for our Georgia CTSA funded grants. The RFP is going to be issued soon. It'll be issued early December, and we put it on our website and we publish that link via our eRoundup newsletter. The first part of this process is a letter of intent application. So it's a short, less than 250 word description of what you would do should you have the pilot grant funding. We don't do the full application at once. We just do LOIs. And then the next phase, if you get invited to submit a full proposal, that's when you would do a full proposal. So that would be due early March, which is 1 month after the LOI selection. So you would have a month to prepare the full proposal. And then the earliest start date for the actual pilot grant would be August 1st, 2026. And the end date would be July 31st, 2027. And we have a very strict deadline because we can't go past the overall grants calendar. So that's why we're so strict on August 1 through July 31st every year, and no NCEs will be permitted. Next slide, please. And here are some tips, even more tips. Dr. Vaughn did a great job with giving so many things. I loved it. But if you just need a few more, they're actually overlapping with hers. Focus on innovation and translational potential for ours. Demonstrate clear collaboration across institutions. We're very big on wanting the partner institutions to show collaboration with each other. So if that's happening in your proposal, please tell us multiple times and clearly that collaboration is going on. Ensure feasibility within pilot timeframe and budget. Again, it's only going to be a year. We typically do $40,000 grants for CTSA grants. And if you have multiple institutions involved, then you can request up to $50,000, which is great. And we have 5 to 6 per grant year that we award. So please apply. And then the last tip again is, please avoid overlapping aims with existing projects that you already have. It should be a new project. Next slide, please. So takeaways here are Georgia CTSA pilot funding equals an opportunity to launch transformative research. It's designed to help faculty test, innovate, and collaborate. And please subscribe to our Georgia CTSA newsletter to learn about future opportunities. We have the RFP I just was talking about will come out there. And in the e-roundup, we publish our RFPs from our partners. So it's really a great resource to have because we're constantly keeping up with our partners. So you might come upon an opportunity that's specific to your institution if you're at a partner institution. So, and I did see something in the chat about dropping that in there, but it's our georgiactsa.org website, and you can scroll to the bottom and join the e-roundup. Okay, next slide, please. And we're doing questions at the end. So just let me know if you have anything, and thank you everyone for your time.
Thank you, Michaela. So either go to the Georgia CTSA website to sign up for the newsletter, or you can email Gaurav, whose email is Lauren just put in the chat. So we appreciate it, Camila. We're going to move on now to Nate Niblick, who's a professor of spatial ecology and geographic information science at UGA. He's also the associate VP for strategic research growth. He's going to talk about pilot funding at UGA.
All right, thanks very much for having me, and I really appreciate the comments Camille made about tips and tricks. I'll reflect on some of my top points at the end here after giving you a brief overview of some of the pilot funding opportunities at UGA. As Kathy said, I'm not a clinical scientist myself, and I'm new to this strategic research growth position as of January. So I really appreciate this opportunity to learn a little more about CTSA as well and how it dovetails with some of our programs. And I think it does pretty well. I don't have any slides to share today, so I'll just I'll point you to our website on internal grants and awards. It'll come right up if you Google UGA internal grants and awards. Most of what I'm going to say is on that page. I certainly also encourage new investigators to check out our Starting Your Research pages, which has a tremendous amount of consolidated resources. And in fact, even as a mature researcher, I've found that page to be really useful in finding some of UGA's resources on relaunching or launching a research program. So again, thanks to Camille for the phenomenal coverage of tips and tricks. I don't have a lot to add, but I'll come back and reflect on a couple of things I think are really important. We have, we have lots of internal funding opportunities at UGA. I'll focus on just 4 types that we offer through the Office of Research that are perhaps most relevant here. We have the first one I want to talk about is the Faculty Seed Grants in Science and Engineering. That's due March 1 of every year. And that funds new promising lines of research, similar to some of the other initiatives we've heard about. Basic or applied research in social life, physical or engineering sciences, It's $25,000, and it's an award. We used to focus on new investigators, but now it's open to anyone, including non-tenure track and clinical faculty. And it's been highly successful. It's been running for years and years with various shapes. And again, the focus is new promising lines of research. The second one I want to bring up, which is a little bit perhaps off target for the CTSA audience, but I'd certainly, if this affects one person in the group, I'll be happy I shared it. We have a program called Faculty Research Grants in Humanities and Arts, which is also due March 1 every year. It's $15,000. It's for the development of impactful, newer, continuing lines of research or creative practice. And I just want to emphasize we've had a lot of success at UGA with art, science, arts, humanities, interacting with engineering and other basic sciences. It really can help stimulate creative approaches to problem solving, and also make your work more impactful. So again, I'd certainly encourage folks to partner with their colleagues in some of these other disciplines and think about creative ways to put a shot in the arm to some of your research ideas. The next one we have, similar to one that I believe was shared at Georgia Tech, we have a relatively small award called Teaming for Interdisciplinary Research Pre-Seed Grant Program. That program has a due date every fall. It's for early stage development funding to support the creation of new research teams in critical emerging areas of work. Teams of 6 to 12, average award is $5,000. Support things like team meetings, retreats, symposium, travel, guest speakers. And again, the goal is to just develop thought leadership in a convergent, important research area to help those new interdisciplinary teams prepare for some of these larger seed grant opportunities. Occasionally, there will be targeted pre-seed awards under this program that are focused on specific themes and often offered in partnership with some of our centers and institutes at UGA. And finally, I want to mention the President's Interdisciplinary Seed Grant Program. I'm currently reading 161 proposals from this year's competition, and we're going to be giving out 10 or so awards in the $100,000 range. The President started this in 2017. Now it's a partnership between the President's Office, the Office of Research and Public Service and Outreach. We encourage proposals that address significant challenges, local, international, and global level, and continue to support UGA's strategic goal of growing research, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Significant challenges in any area of scholarship are encouraged. Some years we do put priority themes in place in some of our strategic research areas, but this year we left it wide open. Because of some of the challenges around funding opportunities, we wanted to make sure everyone had an opportunity. We wouldn't be here if these weren't really successful programs. I just want to mention that the return on investment for these seed grants, as measured in some of the direct ways we can measure it, it's impossible to measure return on investment in a holistic way, but we're at a 3-year timeline. We're at least 50 to 1 on most of these programs, $50 of external future funding and for every $1 spent. And it's almost impossible to measure the additional value add. Particularly, these opportunities form faculty teams, and that activity of those people coming together and doing some thought leadership, and they end up, whether they get our internal award or not, a lot of the teams stick together and go after other external funding. So we really think it's valuable. So I encourage you, whether you're funded or not through some of these programs, take advantage of this opportunity to develop your ideas, team with some of your colleagues, and track your successes and how they tie to these seed grant opportunities themselves. I just want to emphasize a couple of things I find really critical in reviewing these proposals. And again, it's going to be a little repetitive with what you've heard, but I want to emphasize that clear, compelling expression of need, and also the importance of, particularly for the UGA audience, because these are open beyond the sort of clinical and translational realm, speak to a broad scientific academic audience when you're writing these things. I've read so many things that I can barely understand at this point. You're going to be more successful if you can really use some strategic communication and speak to a broader audience for some of these UGA seed grants, because we have some highly tapped reviewers across campus, and they're going to appreciate a really clear understanding of what the need is in your research area and how you're going to fill it. Several of my other comments are fairly repetitive, expressing the importance of feasibility, including a compelling conceptual figure or diagram. And finally, I just want to say, ask questions. Similar to NIH and NSF program directors, feel free to email our office. We are here to get you money and connect you to other resources. I don't consider it a conflict of interest. I'll give you all the tips and tricks in the book. We want to help you get your program jump-started and develop a new promising line of research. With that, I'll close up. Thank you.
Thank you, Nate. And I just echo that comment about writing for a broad audience, because you never know who's going to be reviewing your grants. So it's always great advice to write, to be clear and not assume that whoever reviews your grant will be an expert in your field. I thank you for that. Bakila, there's a question in the chat if you want to go ahead and answer in the chat, but we will take have a longer discussion after we hear from our next speaker, is Kimberly Ack. She is the Senior Associate VP for Research at Emory. She's going to talk about pilot funding at Emory. Kim.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here. I'll talk to you a little bit about these seed funds that we have at Emory. Okay, so the main link that you need to get access to any of this stuff is in our Office of Research Development homepage. I do think you're going to be getting a copy, but if you can get to the Research Development homepage, you can find all this stuff. We have an internal funding expando tab there where you can see this full list that I'm about to share with you. Now, drop it in the chat. How many seed grant opportunities do you think are at Emory? Drop it in the chat. Go ahead. Say a number. Go ahead. Go ahead. Put it in. Let me see. Let me see. How many? A lot. A lot. More than whatever you're thinking. So many more. Well, okay, not 70. All right. Okay. But there are 47. There's a lot. And actually, there's one on nutrition that I need to add to this group. There's so many. So there are many, many seed opportunities. Some are very specific to a very particular niche. Some are very broad, like our University Research Committee program, which basically takes any kind of discipline, any kind of proposal, and the Biological Research Subcommittee is a very popular one, I will say. So there are lots of opportunities at Emory. And I just did a little bit of characterization here, some key factoids. Many of them, almost half, are open to university-wide, and then others are open to some specific kind of point around campus, including some collaborative ones through Pediatric Research Alliance, Grady Health System, and sometimes we also do collaborative seed programs with other institutional partners. And so infectious disease has a number of seed grants in terms of topic, as well as public health and community engagement, health sciences, social sciences and the humanities, pediatrics and child health, lots of things. Okay. Most of these are in that sort of pilot scale type of funding range. About half of these opportunities are 35,000 or less, and there's only a few that are over 100,000. So really great for generating preliminary data and pilot project work. Now, there we go. Tips for applying. Many of these are redundant. I will triple down on what several of my colleagues here have already shared with you, that these are going to be reviewed by essentially non-experts, because probably you as the applicant are the leading expert in whatever sort of niche you're proposing. So you're going to be sending it to what is often a multidisciplinary review committee, especially when we're talking about internal. And so they might not know the absolute specific niche, even if they know your general research area that you're proposing in, because that's your thing. You're the expert on campus in that thing. So make sure you're aware that this is going to be reviewed by essentially non-experts. And then there's always, with internal programs, there's always a little bit of comparison kind of expected. And so making sure that you're really clearly following the instructions, you've got a good understanding of the purpose of the SEED program can be really helpful. And Dr. Vaughn said it several times about scope. And then our colleagues at CTSA, they do not allow NCEs, right? So make sure that as you're thinking about the scope and the resources available, that those two things are really aligned. A lot of the SEED programs either restrict NCEs or they don't allow it at all. And so make sure that that scope is something that you're able to achieve in the timeline that is available to you. Okay, I think that's all I've got. I'll just mention that if you want access to this, the Funding Fridays is where we often announce this. You should usually be seeing on Friday mornings at 6 a.m. An email from the Office of SVPR, and a lot of times we advertise all sorts of SEED opportunities. I'd love to be able to tell you that all of them are InfoReady. They're not all on InfoReady, some are, but some of the SEED administrators use other platforms as well. But when we know about them, we do advertise them in Funding Fridays, and we maintain this internal funding list that's on our website. Okay, that's all from me.
Thank you, Kim. Maybe we'll bring we'll highlight all of our panelists, and we're going to do a question and answer. Kim, you have 2 questions in the chat. If you want to go ahead and answer them to get us started while we get everybody lined up. And then we'll ask the audience to pose whatever questions you have as well.
Yeah, sure. So I see in the chat, if I can talk about a little bit of a relative kind of comparison to other applications. So a lot of times when a review committee is ultimately doing their final ranking internally, they're weighing kind of applications between each other because they have a very specific finite set of resources. So the more that you can, in non-jargon, explain in your application why something is important and have a really tight scope of work, that's going to help your reviewers advocate for your proposal and say, I think this one has a little bit of a better plan than maybe some of the other proposals that we've received. I think that it comes out kind of naturally. I've run many dozens of internal review committees, and when you get to the very end of the process, everything's scored, it's discussed, we've got the initial rankings, we've got the revised rankings, and then we're doing that final tweaking. That's what I mean. The nutrition seed, yeah, Woodruff just put that out. So if somebody has a link to that they can drop in the chat, I don't have it at my fingertips, but there was a recent Woodruff Health Sciences SEED grant encouraging nutrition research. And I bet one of our friends can probably find that for us. Okay.
Thank you. All right, questions for the audience. You don't have to put them in chat. You can raise your hand if you like. I'm not seeing any. So let's do the Cliff Notes, or I'm dating myself, the social media version of the tips that you've heard today. So if you each had to say one thing, like the question I asked Camille, one thing, one piece of advice for people who have not written a grant before but are looking for pilot funding, what would it be? And I'm going to start with Nate.
Did you say Nate?
I did say Nate.
What is my top item? It's hard to beat what's already been said. I really think that communicate the strategic communication of the work. Get outside your disciplinary head and convince me that this is a really important problem. I really feel like that tends to be people's most important challenge when they're writing these things, is making them understandable to a broader audience and expressing that level of impact.
Thanks. And I'm going to pause there because there's a question in the chat that directly about that question, which is, where's the best place to learn how to write research aims or proposals for a broad audience like science communication? Do any of you have suggested resources for that?
There may be others who can say more. I'll say briefly that UGA does periodic grant writing workshops, and our team in my Office of Strategic Research Development does a pretty good job of helping people walk through an aims page and really nail like each component of it. I wish I had handy some of their external resources that they use. I know there are several consulting firms that do training, and we sometimes take advantage of those opportunities to lead larger training opportunities at UGA. But I'll let others chime in with other pieces of advice.
Yeah, this is
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm going to do a commercial for our Pursue program. In the past few months, we've launched a program that we call Pursue. It's all about supporting assistant and associate faculty members who are interested in pursuing new to you funding opportunities. It's a great way to get one-on-one support, working towards proposal development. You can start if you've got a particular opportunity in mind, or if you're still exploring, and you can write to us at researchdevelopment@emory.edu to get connected to that program.
So I was also going to do a commercial for the CTSA. So every spring we have a Southeastern Clinical and Translational Alliance Research Conference. And this year, one of the special sessions that we're going to do is on communicating your science. And so please sign up for that conference. And Lauren, would you put the dates of the conference in the chat, please? And a link to sign up. The link for Pursue in the chat. If you have a moment to do that, someone. All right, back to my original question, your one piece of advice, Bakila.
Oh, it's hard to do just one. So for pilot grants, like I was saying, not overlapping things. We get applications that are just, they try to make the thing new, right? And it's like, no, like it really should be new. Don't talk about your previous things because it'll look like bridge funding. It'll look like I just want to continue something I've already done. Like really just make it seem novel in our application. So I think that's my big one.
Thank you. Michelle.
Yeah, my advice would be to just keep checking those opportunity boards as much as possible and frequently. So it gives you enough time to try to find a collaborator or a team and build a team and get everything together. And then maybe if you have any questions, reach out to the person who's running it and ask your questions so you find out early enough if you're eligible or not.
I can't emphasize enough the point you make about time. We never leave enough time to write these grants. And even though they're usually smaller than, shorter application than major NIH grants, it still takes a lot of time. So I always tell people, figure out how much time you think you're going to need and then double it. Kim.
And I would say just do it. Your first pancake is not going to be perfect, but submitting it to an internal program is a great way to get the experience of preparing an application. A lot of the seed programs mimic federal opportunities as well. They might be not as long, but just do it.
All right.
તારા માટે મારી સાથે કે બહુ કોન્ટેક્ટ નથી.
Yeah, just you do it.
Swati, you are your hand is raised, but you're also
Yeah,
unmuted.
hi there. I'm so sorry, Kimberly. I had a phone call from a clinic and I completely missed what you mentioned about the nutrition seed grant, where to look for that information. I'm sorry. That's
Came
for
out from
Kimberly.
Woodruff. So one of my Woodruff colleges should be able to insert it.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Other questions from the audience? So someone's on the Woodruff Health Sciences website and can't find it. So Kimberly, you may need to find the link and send it to Lauren afterwards. I think I might have just found it though. No, just single cell sequencing. Rashini.
Hi, I want to thank all the speakers first because this was very, very helpful. But I had a question for Camille. So, like for people who are not faculty, for instance, instructors or associate scientists who want to write a pilot grant, there is this question regarding effort that goes into it. So, while we are working on the projects of our bosses, we are also expected to work on this section for our own career development, right? Do you have any insight or any suggestion on what percent looks good or what percent of the grant money can cover for the effort that is put in? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, I think, you want to carefully negotiate that, right? With your, I know the kind of boss/mentor for the award needs to be kind of navigated, I guess. So I would definitely be in conversation with the person that you kind of partner with scientifically to talk about kind of how this aligns with, maybe the lab's overall goals, with the work that, the trajectory that you're on. And hopefully that person's, not just your boss, but also a professional guide and like kind of helping you navigate that. The effort on a pilot is often relatively small for you, and you need, so that might be, I would say, like, for instance, we had a department mechanism at one point that, offered 20% time for fully funded clinicians, right, to get a little bit of buyout of their time. And that's 1 day a week, theoretically, right? So, I mean, that's where the scope of the project needs to be really thought through, because any pilot mechanism is, it's going to fund a small portion of your overall effort. And you're going to need to think about, can I do what I'm proposing with these resources? And if not, how do I scale it to make that feasible? I think I'll just say, someone else asked in a question I might just bring up here in the chat that we directly highlighted, but I did want to mention, if folks aren't aware, at least at the Emory side, if you're looking for kind of a research assistant coordinator role, one resource that we've leveraged and has been really terrific is through the Rollins School of Public Health REAL student program, which is a work study program for master's students. And now, again, this isn't someone who's going to be also early career, right, and learning. But for instance, on that medication safety project Equipped, at one point, we got to a phase where we were looking for some additional support to help us with just getting some code ready for adapting to a new health system clinical data warehouse. And we needed someone who could kind of mark the drugs that were like inappropriate. We ended up just like, let's put in for a real student. We didn't have a whole lot of resources. We ended up getting a pharmacist who was doing their MPH at Emory. It was a fantastic match for the project, and they can work a few out, about 20 hours max a week, but it was a really amazing partnership. So again, much lower cost and might work really well sometimes in ways you don't even know. So exploring some of those types of resources is another option.
Thank you. Bakila.
I wanted to go back to what Kimberly was saying about applying, right? That was some really great advice. And I wanted to add that for Georgia CTSA pilot grants, should you make it past the LOI phase and you'll get invited to submit a full application, we send you the reviewer comments. So you'll have that. So you'll know exactly what happened, with your application. You get the score and the comments. And we encourage you to apply in the next cycle and address those comments. So the first step is getting something out there so you have the opportunity to get some reaction to it.
Thank you, Michaela. So grants, the granting agencies that provide the comments are really, it's really helpful. Now, when I talk about grant writing to trainees, I always say, why do you write a grant? Everybody always says to get the money. But that's really not the only reason you write a grant, because it forces you to pull your ideas together to create a plan. And then you get feedback on your ideas before you start the project, which really helps in the end when you go to implement it. So I think the feedback piece, not all pilot grants do that, because it's a lot of work for the administration and the reviewers. But if they do it, it's really valuable to get. Any other questions? We're coming down the home stretch here. So now's your chance to ask any last questions that you have. Lots of good information in the chat about the Rollins Real Students, if you're interested in that.